It's autumn 1994, and Magic the Gathering has become a craze. Players, eager to get their hands on new cards, buy up every pack they can find, and stores have a hard time keeping them in stock. By now, there's been 4 expansions to the game: Arabian Nights, Antiquities, Legends, and The Dark. In addition, the original set, Alpha, has seen reprints in the form of Beta, Unlimited, and Revised. Each of these releases had sold out almost as soon as they were available, with many stores being unable to get a significant amount in stock. So, for the game's 5th expansion, Fallen Empires, Wizards of the Coast increased the print run. By all accounts, they increased it too much. Any excitement players may have had at actually being able to buy these packs would have quickly turned to disappointment when they discovered within lackluster, underwhelming cards that just didn't seem all that useful. Needless to say, Fallen Empires was deemed a failure pretty much right away. What followed was a challenging year for Magic. 1995 saw the release of Chronicles, which at the time caused an uproar in the collectors community and led to the creation of the now reviled reserved list, as well as sets like Homelands, which some believed to be nearly as bad as Fallen Empires itself. By this point, older gamers were thinking back to the release of E.T. some 13 years earlier, and remembered how it put Atari in its grave. Magic was practically in its infancy, and these were turbulent times. Could Wizards be the next Atari? It's almost 30 years later, and we know that, obviously, that's not the case. Magic's had many run-ins with death before, but it's always come out on top. Still, for many people, the release of Fallen Empires marks one of the lowest points in the game's history, if not the lowest point. Now, when I first learned about Fallen Empires, my response was the same as everyone else. Wow, what a bad set. But, over time, as I learned more and more about this expansion, that opinion has changed. Nowadays, Fallen Empires is one of my favorite Magic sets, and here's why. When most players think about Fallen Empires, they think of underpowered, overcosted creatures and lands that are strictly worse than basics. When I think about Fallen Empires, I think about how it pioneered so many different things, namely in the lore department. First things first, we have to talk about the story. Plenty of Magic sets have a story, but Fallen Empires was the first to have its story tied in so heavily to its set. That's not to say that prior Magic sets didn't have lore, they had plenty, but none were integrated into the cards so much as with Fallen Empires. In the aftermath of the Brothers' War and the detonation of the Golgothian Silex, the climate of Dominaria begins to cool. The various factions of Sarpedia, a Dominarian continent, are now in a race to secure whatever resources they can to survive the coming Ice Age. This brings me to my next point. Fallen Empires is a faction set, the first of many. Fallen Empires had simple factions, each one firmly locked into one of the 5 colors of mana. But there weren't just 5 factions, there was an ambitious 10. The struggle for survival meant that, for the first time, we had a set where colors weren't just competing outwardly against other colors, they were fighting inwardly against themselves as well. White featured the Order of Lightbearer from Acacia and the Feralite cult. Blue had the Vidalian merfolk and the lobster-like Homerids from the north. Black had the Order of the Ibon Hand and their thralls, which eventually rebelled. Red had dwarves, as well as savage goblins and orcs. and finally, green showcased the elves, as well as the Thalids which, like the Thralls, rebelled against their elven creators. These factions were heavily reinforced by the creature types used in the set. Fallen Empires was really the first expansion to have a major tribal theme, with Org and Wall being the only creature types to appear on just one card. The conflict between factions was also further defined by the cards of the set. Take Turok's Chant and Thelen's Chant, for instance. These enchantments mirrored each other, needing an upkeep cost to stay active, but in exchange, they'd make players suffer for playing lands of the opposite colors. This is just one example. There are several cards in this set that define the factions, including entire cycles. In previous Magic sets, a lot of flavor text seemed like it was just filling up space and had no relation to the world of the game. For example, Fissure literally just features a quote from Plato. There's none of that here. All the flavor text in Fallen Empires is actually flavorful, with many pieces being pulled from the Sarpadian Empires, a multi-volume fictional book series detailing the history of this continent and its people. The choice to tie the flavor text of the cards to the setting itself helped to make the world of Fallen Empires feel more fleshed out than most other sets. Sure, there's weak examples here, every set has those, but many of these cards feature flavor text that really gives you a feel for the world they come from. Finally, Fallen Empires was a very experimental set, featuring a slew of new flavorful counters and tokens. Various cards throughout the set also had multiple different versions featuring different art, and the set had 2 different cycles of lands that tried new ways to give the players more mana. The counters used in Fallen Empires were confusing and often hard to keep track of. Having different arts for one card turned out to make it harder to quickly identify what you were looking at and, well, these lands, they're just awful. To make matters worse, many of the cards in Fallen Empires were just not impressive at all. Keep in mind that back in the day, Wizards felt that creatures needed drawbacks for any perceived advantage they provided. Yes, Deep Spawn was a 6/6 with Trample that could give itself Shroud for a blue, but that Shroud effect meant it didn't untap on your next turn, and every turn you had to sack it or mill 2 cards, and this thing cost 8 mana. Brass Claw Orcs was a 3-drop 3/2 that couldn't block anything with more than 1 power. Combat Medic was a 3-drop 0/2 that let you pay 2 mana to prevent 1 damage, and the list goes on. Unsurprisingly, these cards were not received well by players. Yes, there were some standouts like High Tide and Hymn to Torak, but most of this set was so bad, you were better off just ignoring it. Despite these failings, I still very much love this set, and I think the lessons Wizards learned here helped them shape Magic better over the years. Over time, virtually every Magic expansion would come to feature factions, with most standard releases having a story built into the set itself. Tribal themes would be refined over time, giving rise to powerful elf, merfolk, and goblin decks in the years to come. The game would evolve, and the story would evolve with it, giving rise to the Vorthos fans and their love of the lore. The story of Sarpedia is a story of empires in decline. As the frost approaches and resources become scarce, the people battle for what little they can acquire. In the end, the empires fell, and the Ice Age took over. How fitting that this set was considered one of the lowest points in Magic's history, a period that some believed heralded the end. Fallen Empires is by no means an amazing Magic set, but it features what I and many other Vorthos players love so much about this game: intertwining of lore and gameplay in a way no set had done before. And sure, that lore may be attached to some of the worst cards ever printed, but hey, that's the price the Vorthos pays. When I first learned about Fallen Empires, I thought it was just an awful set. Nowadays, I still think it's an awful set, but it's one that I love regardless. And I can't help but wonder if there's other Fallen Empires fans out there. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed, then tap Rainbow Veil for mana and pass it to the like button. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications, and if you have a character or topic you'd like me to talk about, then feel free to leave a comment below. Finally, this video was brought to you by my wonderful patrons. If you want to support me directly, then head on over to my Patreon page. Patrons get early access to all of my lore videos, and I genuinely appreciate their support. Thanks again for watching, and have a great day.